Hello, this is Tom Laurie with the story of Clio Goes to Russia. It all started with John Quincy Adams as the first ambassador to Russia in 1809. He took his wife and two of his children on the Horace and left Boston for Saint Petersburg. There, he would meet the Tsar of Russia, Alexander I, and stay there for 3 years. Now, the Horace was about 100 feet long. This is a watercolor of the Horace. And this is a better picture of a similar ship. Quincy Adams and his wife, they were just passengers, and the blue route was their route, and the red route was our route. So we suffered similar conditions. We went at the same time of year. But this really started 15 years ago when Willard discovered that I had crossed the North Atlantic, and he wanted to do this trip, so he engaged me, and we started off sailing my little boat, and then we got a boat from his cousin that we sailed for a couple of years, took up to Lake Erie, and eventually we were searching out the boat that we were going to rebuild and take to Russia. And this is it. This is the boat finished, the Bayfield 32 with a dinghy on top, and it was a new engine, new self-steering, new sails, new everything. And here we are in Clifton, leaving Willard's house, the three amigos, my identical twin Chuck. But we got to Port Clinton, and as soon as everything was done, it took about several weeks, we set off, and then 60 miles out, we ran into a terrible leak. There was a cushy fiberglass around the stern tube, and we had to turn back, take the boat out of the water, pull the engine out, dig out the bad material, and then make a box and pour a new epoxy in to cover it. But all the time, we always had fantastic food. Willard is a great cook and a wonderful owner, and here we are arriving in Buffalo, going up to the Erie Canal, where we're going to take the mast down now and tie it, put it in cradle on the boat. But the day after, we had to shorten the stays, so that took a good while. But finally, the mast was put on the boat with cradles, and we set off on the 31 locks of Lake Erie Canal. It took about 15 days, and there's 31 canals. So we just waited at night for the canal to open up, but we always had fantastic food. Willard is an incredible cook, so there's nothing like a good cook on board. And we met his aunt, and she delivered some charts in Lake Oneida. A big boat passed it and rocked the boat so bad that the mast fell out of the cradle. Here it is laying on with the lifelines. It had not been for the lifelines, the mast had gone over the side. We got a crane to put it back on. We continued onward. And then in the Hudson River, we finally put the mast back on the boat for good by ourselves. It was an interesting project, but we got through it. And then we went down the Hudson, around Manhattan, up the East River into the Long Island Sound. And then we stopped in Plymouth, and this is a copy of the Mayflower that was there. This is Chuck sleeping in his bunk with the lee cloth up, and Willard's right in the log. Of course, we constantly had wonderful food. It was incredible. And here I am in the dinghy with the emergency cover on it. We used our dinghy as our emergency boat. Here's the track of that route. And we stayed right next to the U.S. Constitution. And we also went to the grocery store and got 2 grocery carts full of food. And there's plenty of food. And his family came to visit. This is Willard's sister. And we set off. As soon as we set off, we ran into contrary winds and 10-foot seas pounding for 3 days. But then it calmed down, and we put out the spinnaker. And here's Willard making notes in the log, which is very important. And occasionally there would be no wind at all, and the birds would just be bobbing around. There would be nothing, but every day, if it was calm, we'd have a fantastic meal by Chef Willard. But these still shots of the boat careening one side or another, you got to imagine that the pictures don't really show how bad the waves were, but they were 10-foot seas, 30-knot winds for 3 days, and it just kept on like that over and over again. Here we are right off at Halifax. You can see that we had a contrary winds. We just didn't know what we had. Just had to sit it out, try to make do with, hold our place, and finally made it to St. John's. Here we are, rafted out, 3 boats, a 60, a 40, and a 32. And this is Jim Winters. He really helped us get our act together in St. John's and took us all over. Here I am in the water with my emergency suit, checking the self-steering just before we shoved off. Here we've rinsed off the suit, and it's drying out. So off we go. Of course, we run into contrary winds, and then we have no wind at all for 3 days. But whenever there was no wind, we had a wonderful meal. Otherwise, we had soup and things like that. And this is a typical view of the cabin. Willard's working, Chuck is sewing, and there I'm sleeping underneath my that cloth. It was a drip cloth that had a drip above my bunk, and all the time in the North Atlantic there were birds flying around constantly, and they're all the same bird, but continually, as you might imagine, the boat was rocking back and forth, and occasionally in the evening I would play guitar. So the birds were all like this. They just live at sea. They just eat crumbs on the surface, but of course the winds kick up, but the birds really don't care. They just sit and bob, and here you can see some places where the winds were contrary, but in the evening I'd usually play a little guitar. And one time when it was really calm, we got to see the sunset, and we saw the green flash twice. It was an amazing sight. But calm means we're not going anywhere, so eventually here you can see the low. Here we had contrary winds coming right on the head for 3 days, the boat pounding into the seas, 10-foot seas, 30-knot winds, but then it would calm down after 3 days. And then one time I stepped out of the cabin, I saw a sperm whale tail 60 feet away going straight down, and this is on August 17th, and I had painted this picture for the man who taught me most about ocean sailing, Captain Eric Forsyth, and he passed away on August 22nd. So that's, I think that was Captain Eric giving us a heads up. Now here's Willard and I. We got our foul weather gear on. We're going out to make a sail change or something, and then that would be done pretty quickly. Everything could be handled inside the cockpit. Of course, the birds constantly are flying around. They always kept us company the whole time, but as you can see, we always had occasional 30-knot winds, and then it would calm down to nothing. And one time I saw a gigantic log out there with some birds on it, and you can imagine all the wildlife. But here's the same bird. There must be a gazillion of them up in the North Atlantic, but they don't really care whether it's raining or snowing or rough or calm or whatever. Here we are approaching Scotland. We're trying to get around, but we're having contrary winds. I was drawing up these graphs, trying to figure out what was delaying us. It was going back and forth. We were right by these islands, and we were just waylaid there for 2 days. Here you can see the actual weather map. We were getting southern winds, and we're constantly looking out for Rona Island. And here it is, our first sight of land in 37 days. Well, we still had 7 more days to go, but after 30 days in the North Atlantic, we finally made land over the top of Scotland. And you can see it by that loop there in the red. That was where we were delayed. And then we had to go up north, and then we finally made through to Fair Isle. And the blue is John Quincy Adams route. But as usual, we always had fantastic food whenever the weather calmed down. But it seemingly never did come down. And coffee was the only thing that really kept us alive. Every morning, anytime, we'd have wonderful French press coffee. Here's the whisker pole, hiking out the Yankee, and we made sextant readings continually at about 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I would work out the reductions later. We did pick up some seaweed in the North Atlantic, and I ate some of it, but I later learned that it had too much arsenic in it. So it's very tasty and rubbery and really tastes great. But this is our go-to navigation device, the Garmin inReach. We communicated with the family with it. It also told us if we were on course or not, gave us a little map of our course. It was fantastic. And once you get in the Atlantic Ocean, you have to oil everything. Everything gets oiled. Everything gets 2 brushes. I had constantly going around brushing this, painting oil on this. Here I am working out the reductions from our sextant readings, and this is the a small part of the pro forma, the little chart that you do your calculations. Here Chuck is stitching embroidery on a jacket he's going to give to Willard with the name of the boat that he picked up in St. John's. It's a beautiful gift. And here's Chuck's hors d'oeuvres, a deviled ham on crackers, some pickles, and here's Chuck frying up some Spam with some Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce, and oyster sauce. And this is the lowest of the low meal, just heated up soup because the weather's too bad. But then it calmed down, and I started making some bread. I raised 2 batches of bread, and I pan fry it. Tastes like candy. It went down. We ate it all up, gobbled it up. It was just fantastic. With some pesto or other sauces, it was incredible. But back to regular. Here we are in the North Sea. We're finally getting. We went around Scotland, and we ran into oil rig, and they called us and said that we were too close and we had to step away. And then we finally made it to Kristiansand, and this is the how the hull looked after 37 days. So we stayed there about 4 days, and then we set off again. All of a sudden, the wheel locked up, and it was because the stainless steel rod and the aluminum bushing just locks up because of salt water. So we had to oil that, and then we set off again. Here we are rounding the tip in above Copenhagen or Helsingør, and here's the castle of Helsingør where Shakespeare staged Hamlet, and then there was an article in the paper about the voyage, about and here's another shot of Helsingør before we stepped away on our way down to the Gulf of Finland. Here we passed Copenhagen, went through the canal, but the waves picked up. We had to go back into the canal and wait out a day while the winds, the contrary winds, blew like the dickens for 2 days. So we set off again, and then the wind picked up again. So we just put into this cute little harbor in Sweden, and as we were coming in, there was a bunch of surfers out there, and we had to sail in between the surfers. And just as we approached it, one of them jumped in front of the boat on his board. Here's the boat out there, and this is the home of the Swedish Stonehenge. It's an incredible sight right up the hill. And we set off the next day. We're in the true Baltic now. We ran into a NATO warship. Here's a typical scene of Chuck sitting in his bunk reading 2 years before the mast. Here's Willard out there taking care of something on the deck with his life jacket on. We did run into a Swedish warship on our way to the Gulf of Finland. We didn't see any American warships, but I don't think they have AIS broadcasting. When we got into the Gulf of Finland, the winds were fantastic. They were right from behind. We ran into this cargo ship Thalia. Now Chuck had invented a character named Thalia, and this is a picture of her in Chuck's bunk from the engine room. She was great company, but she didn't really know too much. Here we are in the middle of the Gulf of Finland. You can see all those green circles are ships. They were laid up just at anchor. They could have been cargo ships waiting for something to happen. Here are the Northern Lights I saw in the early morning. This is Willard talking to the Finnish Coast Guard. They hailed us, asking what our intentions were, and Willard said, "We have no ill intentions. We just want to go to Kotha." And there's the little red dot where we landed finally after a 5-month trip. And this is the boat with some. And then finally we went across the river there, and the boat was taken out. And this is the only damage that was occurred during the whole trip. A little piece of the trail board broke off, and this is what got us there. The self-steering device worked flawlessly, but it wasn't without some chafing we have to address later. It worked 24/7. It was just an incredible device. The prop perfectly clean, the hull beautifully clean. The sink was only a third missing, and here we are slowly mothballing the boat, hanging up lines, greasing everything, oiling everything, opening up all the lockers, putting everything on the deck inside the cabin, and just getting ready. We took changed the oil in the engine, aired out all the bedding, stacked up all the bunks. Everything was prepared. We were going to put the boat on the hard. Here we are with the bags packed, and the boat, after we left, went into a gigantic shed. This is the super yacht shed, but there's no more super yachts because of the war in Russia. And this is what got us through the whole trip. Fantastic beer, and just beer and more beer. We usually run out of beer, but then we'd get more beer, and every night we'd have a nice shot of bourbon, and that really made